This is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoy this critical thought, your daily discussion on game design. And be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and you can pitch future critical thought topics. Alright, everybody, for today's critical thought, this is going to be a two-parter, as we're going to talk about the general state of the retail market versus the rest of the game industry. This first part will be based on today's post, which will be linked below. Now, for those of you who are either making video games or have worked in the game industry in the past, this critical thought you should pretty much be well aware of. But this will be more along the lines for enthusiasts and consumers. Now, a few weeks ago we talked about Nintendo, and during the late 80s they pretty much had a stranglehold over the game industry. This was during the peak of the NES being pretty much the only game in town from, I think it was like mid-80s to like around the late 80s, just before the Sega Genesis arrived. And during that time, it basically was you either work with Nintendo or you didn't make video games. And the retail space has certainly, in a sense, become that kind of gatekeeper. For those of you who don't follow too much about the industry side of things or what it takes to make and sell video games, basically, a video game doesn't just one day show up in your GameStop, Best Buy, Fry's Electronics, and I'm sure many, many more examples out there for those of you either on the West Coast or international. What happens is the publisher in question, you will usually negotiate with the company in mind. And unfortunately, this is basically boardroom deals. We're not going to know about that unless we were actually sitting there. But the point is that the publisher has to negotiate with the retailer in mind in order to get the game in store. And what that will usually entail is making sure that the content is right, there's nothing graphically or culturally offensive. And in the old days, this was usually controlled by the publisher or by the store. So back in the old days, like a store like Target or Walmart probably wouldn't have carried like Castlevania if it wasn't modded, to remove the Christianity symbols. And today's world, that usually will require an ESRB rating. When we look at just about any game that's released, the only way it's going to make it onto a store shelf is if it has that rating, because nobody wants to be held liable for why an 8-year-old kid picked up Grand Theft Auto 5 and the store thought it was okay. Now, as we said, when it comes to this kind of negotiation, one of the major parts of this is the fact that the store will always get a portion of the proceeds for each copy sold. Now again, there is no way of knowing that unless you actually work like at the corporate level of a GameStop or at that level at a publisher. Typically, the developer is not going to be the one handling this. Usually, it's whoever the publisher is for that game will be doing that work for them. But whatever deal that gets decided upon, that's how the money will get split. So when you go to whatever store you want, you give the clerk $60, they give you a game, then you will, of course, my speaker just like popped there just because Skype was turned on, but as I was saying, what happens is that $60 gets split between the store, the publisher, and the developer. Now, developer and publisher, that's going to be their own relationship. And again, unless you've actually dealt with a publisher, you're not going to know what that information is. But what this has meant for going on, probably at this point, over 2 decades, probably even more than that, is that retailers have had a major control over the game industry. Not only with what games are being published, but what games are actually being successful. Because, as we all know, if you hide that brand new game way in the back at GameStop, chances are most people aren't going to find that copy compared to that giant honking display in the front or at the counter. And as we have seen, what we'll be talking about with tomorrow's critical thought is how GameStop and other retailers have tried to capitalize on the used game market. But when it comes down to this is that for these retailers, they have absolute control, and pretty much they've had the bargaining chips, again, for the better part of over 2 decades now. It doesn't matter how great your game is if no one's stocking it. Now, in the old days, pre-orders was were the major way of this kind of developer or publisher retailer relationship. You go to the store, you put down your $10, $20, whatever, and the store has a rough estimate of how many copies they want to order from you. Now, in today's world, that's not the case, and we'll talk about that in the next minute. But this was the way, again, of managing copies sold and providing information to the developers and the publishers as to how successful, or a rough estimate of how successful this game will be. Now, with that kind of control, again, it meant that if the store wasn't going to stock these games, or it kept, unsold copies or non-pure copies way in the back, that kind of hurt the chance of these new games. And it basically provided them with pretty much absolute leverage over what games they could sell and how much money they would make. So, of course, retailers would get a bigger cut of that $60. Now, one of the biggest changes to the retail space, of course, came with online stores. Again, your Amazon, Newegg, and those are pretty much the two big ones that I use. I'm sure for you watching this, there are probably more examples out there. But suddenly, you were able to buy video games without having to go to a retailer. You didn't need to worry about making sure they ran out of copies. You don't have to, go to the store when it's snowing or wait in line. It's as easy as putting your credit card in, getting a confirmation code, and then just sitting back and waiting for the mail truck to get there. Not only that, but this also was a really great thing for stuff like Amazon and Newegg. You don't need a wholesale or a retail store, which means you don't need to pay employees to work there. You don't need to pay as many daily expenses as, the hundreds of chains of GameStops around. And it just made a lot easier for both the consumer and for them to sell games. Now, of course, this took a major hit in GameStop, EB Games, and so on's pocket. And over the last decade, we've been seeing attempts at retailer stores to try to remain relevant. As anyone who's walked into a GameStop knows, they push pre-order bonuses really big. The second thing, of course, they push are used games, but again, we'll talk about that tomorrow. But the idea, of course, is they want to get your money, and they want to do anything they can to do that. So whether it's an exclusive skin, bonus map, stuff like that. But when it comes down to it, publishers and developers just hate the retail kind of contract they have going. Because again, they're sharing money. And as any corporation knows, they don't want to share that. They want 100%. And with the used game debate, that of course raised issues like Project $10, which was, I believe, EA, Activision, maybe a few other publishers' attempt at destroying the used game market by requiring you to, or locking out content unless you spent an additional $10 or you bought the game new. But again, that will have to be saved for tomorrow. Now, the really big deal, and why I started writing about this topic a few weeks ago, is with the with the growing amount of streaming options. Again, for those of you who are longtime fans of Game Wisdom, you can take your drink now, as we have to mention Steam. But of course, there's now stuff like PSN, Xbox Game Pass, PlayStation Now, the Wii U store, whatever they're naming for the Switch, and so on. Digital copies is a very big deal for the state of selling games. Before then, games were a physical amount. There was a quantifiable amount of this game that could be made, or that could be out there. If I print 700,000 copies of a game, that means I can only make 700,000 copies worth of money. With digital, however, once that code is finished, I can push a key and get keys infinitely. And that will also be a greater concern when we go to use games tomorrow. But, as we've talked about before, one of the major points about digital and retail was when it was announced and people were getting excited about it, there was this growing sense of, why should retail games be costing more, or why should digital and retail be equal? Digital, of course, you don't have a physical copy, there's no shipping, art, printing of manuals, anything like that. So why should a $60 game digital cost a $60 game in retail? And again, part of that is people want to make more money. But another side of that is that it's really like retail keeping that control. Because you know that if Microsoft or Nintendo or Sony or anyone like that wants to sell a brand new game cheaper online, then why would someone go to GameStop? Again, if the game's going to be billed as games as a service or have a DLC or day one patches, that physical copy doesn't remain relevant for long. So it would make sense just to get a digital copy of that game. Of course, GameStop doesn't want that because if you buy the game directly from Sony, Microsoft, whatever, they're not getting any money. And if anyone tries to do this, GameStop will just say, you know what? All your retail copy of your game, we're not selling them anymore. Screw you, basically. And that has kind of been that grip on retail and why it still is a part of the game industry today. But as we've been seeing over the last few months, and especially what we'll probably be seeing in the coming months as well, are more options for streaming games or buying them digitally. Again, besides the Xbox Game Pass, there was an announcement of Twitch and Amazon partnering so that you can buy games via your Twitch, which is then tied to Amazon, and everyone gets a share of that. But this is just another example of trying to squeeze out retail stores. Again, your Best Buys, GameStops, etc. And as we've been seeing, these stores have been taking a hit over the last few months and the last few years. And here's what I think. And again, this is the ever popular, guy makes prediction on a blog or vlog part. I think we are going to head for a time when GameStop's number is up. I don't know when it's going to happen, but I can tell you, I think the two events that's going to lead to it. The first one is a removal or lowering the restrictions of bandwidth when it comes to downloading games. Here's a brief lesson on download speeds for you, courtesy of, I guess, Professor Josh. What determines how fast you download something, be it a website, a game, movie, whatever, there are two factors involved with that. The first is your download speed, whatever you have from your ISP, and the second is the bandwidth capacity of the site or server you're connecting to. Because these sites are servicing, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people very rapidly, they keep the bandwidth low so that one person doesn't just monopolize everything. This is why during major sales, when the bandwidth capacity is being overloaded, during Amazon when they did pre-orders for the Switch or Amiibos, that the whole site just slowed down to a crawl no matter how fast your internet was. And what this essentially means is there is a diminishing return on your download speed. There comes to that point where it doesn't matter how fast of a connection you have from your ISP if the server isn't able to compensate. And I'll give you an example for me. I remember, in terms of charting my internet speed, I went from 56K to a 1 meg connection to 5 to 10, then 20, then 50, and then right now on a good day, I can get about 115, 120 meg download speeds from my ISP. Now, again, with those numbers, you're probably thinking, well, I must be, downloading games like nobody's business and all that. But that's not necessarily true. The reason is that these servers are still capped. This is why when you go onto Steam, sometimes you'll have a 3 meg download, sometimes you could have a 12 meg download. But you're never going to get your full download speed. For those of you who have higher end internet. And as a quick question, for those of you watching this, what kind of internet speeds are you averaging? For those of you who are just getting the normal internet, so you're not paying for, the fancier speeds or the business class speeds. Again, I have Comcast and it has been steadily going up as time has gone on. But the point is, right around the time I was hitting about 20 megs of download, I really didn't see any more of an impact in terms of how fast I was going on websites and downloading games. Now, with that said, of course, please keep in mind, I am a single household. I'm usually the only guy downloading and playing games. There goes my Skype again, if you heard that. But the point is, if let's say I had brothers and sisters or children here using my Wi Fi, you know, either on laptops, tablets, game systems, whatever, then of course my internet speed, that 150 and 120 meg download, would be split between the devices. Now, in that case, having that huge download speed or bandwidth would be great. If I only had a 10 meg connection, we had 5 people here using the internet, we're splitting about 2 megs of download between the 5 of us. It's not going to be all that fast. But again, for what I'm doing here, I'm pretty much well capable for my internet. Now, of course, when problems pop up and all that stuff, that's another story. But going back to the original point, if servers can be upgraded or that bandwidth, that was not easy to say, restriction gets removed, and suddenly we're able to download stuff at 40, 50, 60, and up megs per second, imagine what that would do for getting games easily electronically or through streaming services. Imagine if there's a 50 gig game and I could download it at 100 megabytes per second. 1,000 megs is 1 gig, so 10 seconds, so 50 seconds, I could download a 50 meg game. That would have been really amazing when I tried to download Doom 2016 a few months ago. But again, this will remove one of the major barriers of digital versus physical. Again, the long download times. Because it's not just you downloading from Sony, Microsoft, whatever, it's everybody on that server downloading at the same time. Now, the second event, and this is the one that, when this happens, I think this will be the nail in GameStop. The second event is the first time that a major developer, I'm talking Blizzard, Rockstar, Nintendo, that level of developer, announces that their next game will not be sold in a retail store. No Best Buy, no GameStop, no Fry's. It can all be handled electronically thanks to improved internet speeds and again the bandwidth restrictions. Just imagine for a second if GameStop couldn't get any proceeds from the latest Call of Duty or the latest Grand Theft Auto or Zelda game. Imagine how much that would kill their bottom line. And if it works, that's the other big point. If Grand Theft Auto 6, for instance, gets sold electronically and it still makes bank, EA's going to keep an eye on that. Sony, Nintendo, etc. And if it works for Rockstar, it's going to work for them. And suddenly, you don't need to share that extra money with GameStop or Best Buy or anyone else anymore. And I think when that happens, it is going to be a very dark day for GameStop indeed. But as we know, GameStop has had a major control over the used game market. But I'm sorry, we're going to have to save that for tomorrow. So again, to wrap things up, retail and developer and publisher relationships has always been this very uneasy partnership between the two. Part of it has been the used game side. Another part of it has been the control retailers have had over a game's success. And as we've seen over the last few years, that control has been becoming less and less. And as streaming and internet download or internet speeds become more accessible and more powerful for everyone, it's going to be very telling or very interesting to see what's going to happen to the retail side of things in the coming months and years. For those of you watching this, what do you think about this? Do you think retail stores like GameStop are just circling the drain at this moment? Do you think there's anything they can do to remain relevant? And if you want to talk about used games, well, you'll have to say that for tomorrow. So with that said, thanks so much for watching today's Critical Thought. Be sure to like and subscribe if you're brand new, and check back daily for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. And if you have a suggestion for an upcoming Critical Thought, don't hesitate to let me know. Until tomorrow, see you all then. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBycer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.